And I think leadership is exactly the same. It's progressive. It's a continuous improvement of those around you to create the outcomes that are required. You know, that idea of what got you here won't get you there. If you're an aspiring leader, you've got these skills to this point, but how do you get to the next level if that's where you want to go?
Welcome to the Thriving Workplace Podcast,
the show that empowers your workplace to make a positive impact on your people, teams, and the entire organizational community.
Whether you're an employee, manager, or executive, we've got something for you.
Dive into inspiring ideas, practical tips, and meaningful conversations about employee well-being.
We're your hosts, Lauren and Jason, passionate workplace well-being champions from the Workplace Performance and Wellbeing Institute.
Join us as we bring in renowned experts and thoughtful leaders to share their wisdom, experiences, and innovative approaches to building a thriving workplace. Welcome back to another episode of the Thriving Workplace Podcast. This week, we're joined by a very special guest. She is the founder and chief vision officer of Elements for Success, a global organization dedicated to delivering transformational experiences. She empowers individuals of all ages to develop the confidence, skills, and the tools needed to live purposeful lives. And this woman is committed to guiding and inspiring others on a journey towards personal and professional excellence. So please welcome to this week's episode, Kylee Leota. Hello.
Oh, thank you so much, Jason and Lauren, for that amazing introduction. I'm so grateful to be here.
Amazing, Kylee. And thank you so much for your time. And I'd love to start by giving the listeners a little bit more about you and a little bit of context, a little bit of background.
Yeah, so I come from an education background. That was how I started out. And I joke, you know, when I was young, I always wanted to be a teacher. First, it was a music teacher, but apparently you need musical talent for that. Who knew? And then like any kid of the 90s, I wanted to be a PE teacher. And then after that, that evolved into, I always had this overwhelming desire to, I guess, empower people, and I always had a strong sense of social justice. So what I ended up going into is disability, complex behaviour and trauma. So those kids that were the underdogs, the misunderstood, the misguided, and helping them find their voice that stood away from those negative behaviours into creating that success, that what that looked like for them. And after 20 years, I made a change. I pivoted into my own business and some entrepreneurship with a few different businesses. And what I'm passionate about is leadership, and whether that be leadership of self or leadership of others, and creating safe spaces for brave and courageous conversations. So whether I'm doing one-to-one, whether I'm doing group, or whether I'm doing corporate workshops, I'm really, really passionate about creating that space, because I think as a leader, one of the things that I struggled most was having a safe space to unpack my thoughts in a place that I wasn't going to be judged, in terms of how do I process that out loud without getting in trouble or seeming incompetent or seeming like I had no idea what I was doing, even though that probably was the case sometimes. But I just needed somewhere to process that, because once I processed it, I could pick myself up and keep going and then continue to build those capacity in those around me. So that led into this particular journey. I'm really, really passionate about creating really strong psychological safety in organizations, because we know that having strong psychological safety is directly correlated to innovation and creativity. And we want our organizations to thrive. And I think we need to move away from the either or idea. Either you're a really hard worker and you've got well-being, or you've got well-being and you're seen as a slacker, or, you know, what are those old narratives that happen? We've got to create a both and environment so that you can have the well-being. And I talk about this concept of harmony, well-being, and be a high performer and create excellence in a workplace. It doesn't have to be an either or.
I love that. I love that. So many things I want to dive into for this podcast. The first one I want to know, though, is around leadership. And what's your definition of leadership? Because out there are so many different definitions. You know, it might be, you know, the power of influence. What is your definition of leadership?
Yeah, I've probably got a bit of a broader definition, and that kind of starts actually back with my definition of success. So my business is actually called Elements for Success, and that came about. Success has a weird, and sometimes it's got the ick vibe, and it's got a whole heap of things around it. But I read this quote that said, Earl Nightingale, one of the founders in personal development, he said, "Success is the progressive realization of a worthy goal or ideal." And I'm like, ooh, that I can get my head around. And there's lots of different elements for that. And I think leadership is exactly the same. It's progressive. It's a continuous improvement of those around you to create the outcomes that are required. And the model that I use is one that I've designed myself, and it's about being an infinite leader, because what we need is a process to be able to reflect and have continuous improvement. And, that idea of what got you here won't get you there. If you're an aspiring leader, you've got these skills to this point, but how do you get to the next level if that's where you want to go? And it requires reflection and continuous improvement. And so the model I designed about being an infinite leader is an evolution, and it's a constant evolution, but it's equally a non-judgmental evolution. So it's being okay with who I am right now and also continuing that journey to be an even better version into the future. So the I pillar in infinite starts with identity. It starts with self. And then we move through to nurturing, which is our emotional intelligence. But it's not only just about us. We always start with self, but we then move out to how do we support that in our teams or in our organization. Then we've got fearlessness, we've got innovation, and then we've got nobility, influence, transformation, and ecosystem. So we start with identity, this identity of self, but then we finish with ecosystems because it's a whole package. I don't think there's one particular key element of leadership because I think they're all intertwined and they're all equally important. But for you, Jason, you might, in this particular stage in your life, might need that element of, that pillar of leadership to be focused on. For me, my own journey this year has really been a lot on my ecosystem. Have I got the right ecosystem around me to continue to thrive and grow and manage my well-being while still continuing to be a high performer? Previous to that, it has been my identity. Who am I? When I left education, oh my goodness, who am I? I thought that's what I was going to do forever. So how do I incorporate that and be my authentic self through that journey? So I think leadership is the ability to build capacity within yourself, but also share that by building the capacity in others to create that excellence that empowers everybody. That's what I believe leadership to me.
Yeah, I love that. And it's so relatable as well because I've got a teaching background as well and left the teaching profession. And the same as you, it's like, well, what's my identity now? Now I'm not labeled as a teacher.
Yeah.
Where am I going now? And it's, you literally, your acronym there is perfect because that's literally when you finish something, you've got to, okay, where am I now? Who is my new self? What is my new identity? I love that.
And I'd like to know a little bit about, what can our listeners do today to start showing up as a better leader and really start on their journey? Because I love what you're about, Kylee, that anyone's a leader and everyone should be a leader in their own right, in their homes, in their workplaces. No wonder it doesn't matter about their actual position, their title, but everyone listening to this is a leader. So what can they do today?
Yeah. And I think, the word authenticity gets thrown around a lot. But I think, as a former educator, I'm sure you'll be able to understand this story. Leave yourself at the door, leave yourself at the gate. You walk in the school grounds and you need to be this person. And I still think there's a bit of a philosophy in corporate. We're moving away from that. But, it's like, well, I can have well-being at home, but I can't have it at work. Or we'll talk well-being, but we don't really want you to do it. Like, everyone should have a lunch break, but I'm not going to take a lunch break because then, what will people think of me? I'm not working hard enough if I don't have that lunch break. And I remember talking to one of the leaders. She goes, I really encourage everyone to have a lunch break. And I'm like, but do you have a lunch break? She goes, oh, no, don't be silly. I said, well, do you think your staff will have a lunch break if they don't see you doing it? Or do you think they'll question whether or not they should have a lunch break if you're not doing it? Because that's the alignment between that authenticity, between walking your walk and talking your talk, right? And I think in terms of starting right now, one of the things I probably think is the most transformational thing, there's a couple of things, but one of them is about having a strong reflective practice that doesn't involve judgment. So what am I doing well? How can I do more of that? And what's not working so well without judgment? What do I need to change, reduce, or eliminate? And everyone, when I do this activity with my clients, everyone wants to get to the second page. What's not working well? Like, let me write the list. Let me write the ways. And let me count the ways, And I'm like, no, we start over here with what's working well. And they're like, this is really hard. And I'm like, yeah, but our brains are wired to look for the negative, right?
Yeah.
So it's like playing the game of, I'm older generation, so punch buggy, but, the younger generation, spotto. If your brain has a filter system, and so if you're looking for the negative, guess what? You'll find it. If you're looking for the positive, guess what? You'll also find it. So let's start over here, build that muscle, build that practice of what went well today. And so sometimes it's, I got out of bed today. Yay me. Sometimes it's, I didn't blow up when that situation happened. go me. So, but carry those micro moments, because then that snowballs into bigger successes. And once you tend to see success and positive, you tend to build that success. So having a really strong reflective practice, which starts with those two key questions: what's working well? How can I do more? What's not working, without judgment? And what do I need to change, reduce, or eliminate? Because we spend a lot of our time, and teachers are terrible at this. Busyness is a badge of honor. I remember coming home from education one day going, I didn't even go to the bathroom today, but almost like, yeah, I was so busy, I didn't even go to the bathroom. And then I'm like, there's probably something wrong with that picture, right? That I didn't go in 9 hours. I didn't even go to the bathroom. There's probably something wrong with that, right?
Yeah.
But teachers normalize that stuff. So not normal, by the way, for anyone teachers listening to this podcast. Not normal to not go to the bathroom. Please find time. But we do. And I think we have to reframe our references of what normal looks like. And I think that well-being piece around harmony and I struggle with the word balance, because as a leader, I was either a good worker or I was a good parent. I didn't always felt like I did both well. And my very first day of getting a promotion, I walked into my new role, and by 9 o'clock that morning, I got a call to pick up my kid who was sick, and I'm a single parent. So I'm like, okay, do I either on my very first day of work be a good worker and not, I don't know, somehow pretend my kid doesn't exist, or do I be a good parent and go pick up my kid and feel bad that on my first day of work, I'm already feeling unreliable, even though I know I'm not, right? So how do we create this harmonious life? And I think there's lots of different elements that make up your life. There's family, there's health, there's money, there's your work or role and everything. And I liken it to a symphony and having an orchestra. And in an orchestra, you've got the percussion, you've got the strings, you've got the brass, you've got, the woodwind, you've got all these different sections of an orchestra. And in order to play the perfect symphony, you need all of the parts. But sometime in that symphony, something could play solo. So it's okay for things to have a focus on work for a while, or I'm going to focus on my family for a while. But we all know through going through many rock songs, tragedies, that any solo that goes too long is tragic. It's terrible for the soul. It's terrible for life. You can't just focus on work your whole entire life. You can't just focus on your family, because your kids grow up and then you don't know what to do with yourself. So at some point you got to rein it back in. But even when it is playing solo, it's not like nothing else is playing. Everything else is still playing in the background. It's just playing quieter. And so how do we create this beautiful symphony that has the ebbs and flows of the different elements of the orchestra, and also understand that, your percussion is kind of like the foundation in any musical thing. And what's your percussion piece? For me, it's my health. If my health is not good, then everything else is impacted. Just like in the percussion, if your percussion's playing too loud, too soft, too fast, too slow, then it throws everything else out. So what's the percussion piece in your life, and how do you make that work so that it's playing just right, so your symphony can perform to its best, and it's creating this beautiful symphony, of life. So creating that constant harmony within your life, but being able to sit there and go, well, I think that's been playing solo a little bit too long. How do I then bring that back into my orchestra and into my symphony, so that either everything's just playing together for a little while, or I need to actually take the time to focus on this thing for a while, and it's okay.
It's a great analogy.
Yeah.
I really love that. And I'm such a visual person, so I'm really visualizing everything that you're saying. And I'm thinking that the listeners right now are probably listening to this going, this sounds really great, Kylee. And I want to know how to stop something playing solo right now, because maybe I'm focusing on work too much. What would the first step be? Because I know there's a lot of barriers to people changing this, and creating some sense of harmony. What do you think the step is, and what can they do?
Permission. What do I need to give myself permission to do right now?
Great question.
I love it.
Yeah. And I know it sounds simplistic, but it's really complicated, because, I can relate to the fact that, well, if I give myself permission to have the weekend off instead of working through and doing all those things, my life's going to be harder on Monday. But is it though? And actually creating a bit of a, one of the things that I do when I'm working with my clients is I look at what's the outcome you're looking for, and what are the steps to getting that outcome? And it could be like, for example, the business owner issue is I have to do it all myself, right? Or even as a single parent, I have to do it all myself. But, or what would it look like if I got a VA that could help me do this part? What would I need to give myself permission to let go of to hand it over to somebody? Because if you've had to do it all yourself for a very long time, it's very hard to let that go. But what would be the thing? And so I work with people on what's your zone of genius? What's your zone of frustration? Delegate that stuff out first. Good God, get rid of that. Find somebody, my bookkeeper, I adore her. And I hate reconciling my books. It's like one of my most painful, like nails down the chalkboard type of activities. And do you know what she said to me? She goes, I love reconciling. And I'm like, oh my God, I love you.
Yeah.
Because the zone of genius is my zone of frustration. How complimentary is that? And what takes her 5 minutes to do would take me 5 hours because I would procrastinate the absolute bejesus out of that thing. And so, but 5 hours of my time is precious. It takes her, so she's going to do it. So what it costs in, oh my gosh, I don't have the money to do that. Well, I worked it out. It actually takes, 10 minutes of my working an extra 10 minutes will pay for that hour for her to do that.
Yeah.
And being able to do that. But it starts with, what do I need to give myself permission to do? What are the things that I love? What are the things that I love to be in flow with? And what do I not like? And am I in a position where I can delegate some of that out or find somebody who that's their zone of genius? So it's a complementary fit for everybody.
I want to go back just a couple of minutes because you were talking earlier about, and I see this with teachers all the time and working with teachers as well, is like leaving yourself at the gate type thing, leave everything at home from a leadership perspective. And, it's not just teachers as well. No. We're always putting on these masks, the mask of, right, I'm the leader. I'm walking in as the CEO today, but I know that my family at home is just absolutely breaking down. The car broke down this morning. I spilled coffee down my shirt this morning. But hey, I've got to put this mask on now, and now I'm ready to go. What are some ways that leaders and individuals, because we're all, like we were talking before, we're all self-leaders, where we can remove that mask and be that authentic person who we are every single day?
Yeah, I think from my own experiences, I've had really good experiences where there was a really safe environment to do that. And then I've had experiences where that was absolutely, we talk about authentic self, we talk about it, but we don't actually want it, right? And so I think foundationally to that is developing strong psychological safety in the organization. And I think fundamental to that, the piece that I talk about a lot, which I don't know how, when I've shared this with others, they're like, oh yeah, that's really not something that's done very well, is I think we've got an onus of the organization needs to create this for me, but we forget the fact that as leaders, we have an obligation into the process as well. So organizationally, the organization absolutely has a requirement and a necessity to provide a psychologically safe environment because we know that's where excellence comes from. But what's my responsibility in that space to, if I'm wanting to create an inclusive environment, what does inclusion feel like for me? What does it look like to feel accepted and to feel like I belong? And to then, who do I tell that to? In terms of being a learner, who are my safe people? And start there rather than feeling like you have to, be vulnerable and authentic to everybody in the organization. Start with your low-hanging fruit, the people that you can feel comfortable with, and then build your ecosystem, like I was mentioning earlier, in terms of what that modeled practice looks like. And I think one of the things that happens in that psychological safety workplace is we have this expectation that it's created, but we don't actually take the time to reflect and go, well, what would that look like for me to feel like I could challenge that decision that was made, or if I don't really agree with this situation, or if I want to contribute my opinion, who are the people that I feel safe enough in my organization to share that with without being worried about judgment? Start there and then move out. And if you're responsible for yourself, start with yourself. Create a psychologically safe environment for yourself. If you're part of a team, work with your team. If you're responsible, start with what you can manage and get those runs on the board, and then gradually build that up for yourself and for others around you, because we know that modeling the way is one of the key elements of leadership. So if I'm telling, it's a bit like the lunchtime story I was telling earlier, right? If I'm telling everyone it's okay to have lunch and then I don't have lunch myself, what am I modeling right now? So I wouldn't want my staff to not go with that lunch. So what behavior would I need to do to make sure that they feel safe enough that that's a good option for them? I might need to once a week go sit down in the staff room and have lunch with them. What are the behaviors I'm modeling that are going to align my words with my actions?
I love that. I'd actually like to dive a little bit more into psychological safety in the workplace because it is obviously a very big topic at the moment, and it just gets thrown out there. And I know that from our sort of perspective dealing with clients and workplaces, it's one of those scary topics for workplaces. And it's also one of those ones where they think, I just need to get a tick in the box. I just need to get a tick in the box. Yeah, what is your sort of perspective on it? How can we maybe soften it up a little bit and actually make it something that isn't just a tick in the box?
Yeah. So tokenism. I hate it. And this is one of those things around authentic, we talk about authentic psychological safety is embedded, immersive. It's even like we go back to, I talk about feedback, when you say, hey, I'd like to get some feedback. Well, first of all, how often do you actually ask for it? Second of all, because if you don't ask for it, there's something going on that you don't feel safe enough to ask for it. Second of all, when it's delivered to you, like I worked in an organization where they gave 360-degree feedback. And one of the pieces of feedback was I talk too much to brown children. Let me tell you how psychologically safe environment that was. That was legit feedback in writing to me about my leadership.
It's so strange.
Right? So when I do leadership and people say to me, do you do 360-degree feedback? I said, well, I can, but I will not unless I feel confident that the organization is psychologically safe to get proper fit. Because what do you do with that? Our school was 60% brown children, the school I was at. So, I think foundationally, leaders get scared of it because they think it's about letting people get away with stuff. I can't bring this up because they're going to claim bullying or I'm not creating a psychologically safe environment. And that's actually the opposite of psychological safety, because psychological safety is I can bring this up and we're going to be okay at the end of it.
Yeah.
We're still going to be okay.
So true.
They think it's about, being soft. It's actually the most robust and hardest place to be, but it gets that innovation and creativity. And I think that's one of the things we focus on is what's the outcome you'll get as a result. Because psychologically safe environments is not the result. The result is excellence. It's innovation. It's creativity. The way to that is psychological safety. And so what does that look like and sound like? And I actually get people to, again, reflect on what that would look like for them. When we give feedback, there's lots of different ways of giving feedback, but how often do you actually ask somebody, hey, Lauren, when you're calm, not in the midst of everything, but hey, Lauren, if I've got to give you some feedback on something, how would you like to receive that feedback? And you actually go, I've never really thought about it. No one's ever asked me that. That's usually the response I get when I say, so, because, people talk, we don't use the love sandwich. And I'm like, well, it's not always great, particularly because it's often a tokenistic thing as well. And it's, but for some people, for some personality styles, being told what they do well as what they can work on is actually a really effective strategy. So let's not rule that out. Let's not stop generalizing these things. And we often give and receive feedback in the way that we'd like to give and receive, like we'd like to receive it. So the person that gives the bullet point email, usually because that's how they'd like it, right? And so, but how often do we sit around and actually say, hey, what would that look like and sound like and feel like for you?
Right.
You asked it and I thought, oh, wow, I haven't even thought about it.
I've never thought about that.
No one's asked me this.
Until you said the love sandwich, and I love how you called it that because I say something else.
Yes. Yeah, because it's how it's kind of been categorized to us. But guess what? I run on the smell of an oily rag. If you tell me I'm doing a good job and then tell me I need to improve on something, but then remind me that I'm still a good person, I actually quite like that style of feedback, as long as I feel like those good things are authentic, not tokenistic.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
I've got other people that are like, just hit it to me, like just tell me where I'm annoying you. And I'm like, oh my God, that feels so confrontational for me.
Yeah.
I don't want to do that. And, I was having a conversation with my son. Kids are, the best teachers sometimes. And a couple of years ago, he's 18 next week. But he said to me one time, I was like, so I'd like to suggest, we're driving home and I'm from soccer or something. And I'm like, so I'd like to suggest, and he goes, so is it optional? And I'm like, well, no. And he goes, could you not make it sound like that? Because it makes it sound optional to me. And then if I don't do it, I'll get in trouble. Can you just be more direct? And I'm like, but I don't want to be direct. That's very confronting for me. But I then realized in that moment that I needed to adjust the way that I was giving that information because he needed to receive it in that way. And even though that was confronting for me, that was going to get him the outcome he needed, which is actually the ultimate goal of feedback, isn't it? To change, to improve the outcome for the person. It's not about me.
Yeah.
It's about how to do that. So why would I not ask you how you would like that?
I love it. I think in these scenarios we do make it about ourselves, don't we? Because all of our insecurities, everything that's going around our head, our inner critics coming out in those moments, because it is a little bit confrontational.
100%.
And it takes courage to give feedback or to speak up. So we make it about ourselves. But if you just go from that perspective of, actually, it's not about me, it's about them. And I'm actually doing it from a purpose of serving. I want them to get the best out of this situation and work at the best and everyone to enjoy working with them. So that's why I'm giving them the feedback.
Yeah, for sure. And I think if you've got strong psychologically safe practices in place, those conversations will be easier because people know that if you've got strong psychological safety, that you're coming from a place of good intention. And so that unconditional positive regard that we talk about in coaching is the fact that people are doing the very best they can with what they have.
Yeah.
And so, but how do we help them be better? And so that's that premise. And if I know that we've got really strong psychological safety and you've got to give me feedback, but I know we've done all of this work to know that you're coming from a good place of good intention when you're telling me this, I'm going to receive it differently than if I'm sitting there going, oh my God, you hate me and you just want to get rid of me.
Yeah.
My ability to process the information you're giving me is going to be completely different. But if we've done the work organizationally that, hey, I really wasn't sure, how you brought that thing up the other day. I felt a bit uncomfortable when you brought it up in front of everyone. Next time, would you be able to just come to me? You're like, well, we've done the work on this. I know that you're trying to just help me out, be a better version to get that better outcome. No worries. I'm not personalizing it as much. And you get greater growth, which then leads to, again, greater outcomes, greater innovation, greater transformation, because we've got a solid foundation and we're all speaking the same language.
Yeah, wow.
All speaking the same language. Love
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, I love it. And it's just being that open, having that openness
Yeah.
within the workplace, because I've been in so many workplaces as an employee myself, and then we've gone into workplaces as well. And it's like, actually, we can fix a lot of these issues by just being open and having that open communication between everyone.
Yeah. But how often has that been modeled for us? Like generationally, I think I'm a smidgy older than you guys, but open conversations were not a thing when we were growing up, right? And I often, I talk about my kids. I use them as examples all the time, but I'll tell some conversations I've had with my kids and they're like, wow, you guys have got a really open, dialogue. And that doesn't mean we don't argue. I've got teenagers, man, like absolutely we're not always on the same page. But because I've done the work to model that open conversation, then we generally get it right more often than not. But it's been a practice. I think that's the other part. It doesn't happen like magic. Like you're not Mr. Beast on YouTube the very first time you do a YouTube video, right? And I think there's a disconnect sometimes that we should be able to get it right all the time. And I think, one of the things I talk about is, hey, I'm trialing this, new idea. So, can you hold space for me while I'm muddling through this? And then if I stuff it up, I'd go, hey, I'd like to circle back because I really didn't show up the way that I wanted to. I was trying to do this, but I think I missed the mark. Would we be able to sit down and have a conversation? And could I have a do-over?
Yeah.
And even those kind of conversations, if I said to you, hey, Lauren, I think I really stuffed up that conversation we were trying to have the other day. Would it be okay? My intention was I was trying to get this, but can we circle back and when you're ready, could we sit down and actually have that conversation? How likely are you to have that conversation with me as opposed to you walking away going, oh my God, I can't believe Kylee showed up in that meeting the other day like that. I can't, what's going on with it? And then if I knew that I stuffed it up and then didn't come back, that causes a disconnect between the two of us. But if I said, hey, I think I stuffed that up, can we circle back and have a conversation about it? Chances are, even if you were annoyed with me, you would be more open to having the conversation than not.
So I think there's a few things playing, taking that level of responsibility and ownership, but then also bringing that human being piece into it. And we talk so much, and I think the theme of all the podcasts recently have just been about be that human being, bring your human self to work, open up, let down the barriers. I feel like in the corporate space, we can just put our masks on and we're so black and white and we're just these robots getting stuff done. But at the end of the day, if we connect heart to heart and we actually let down our walls, show some vulnerability as a leader and as a person in the workspace, so much can change. It's so powerful.
Yeah.
And I think the other part of that is we we have to model what that looks like. If we want our staff to be open with us, how are we leading that conversation? By modeling being open, because we are the models for what goes on in our organizations. We are the models for what goes on in our lives. If I want my kids to tell me and be honest with me, then that starts with me being honest with them and modeling the way. Glennon Doyle has a quote that says, "My children don't need me to save them. They need to watch me save myself." And I was like, knife through the heart, my friend. Because I'd be coming home from, school going, what am I modeling right now? That you have to stay in an organization that doesn't fill your cup, that's no longer aligned to your true north, because what? And I wanted my children to know that I could do hard things and they could do hard things. And if I show them, and so it's not about not crying or not whatever, but it's about going, oh my God, this is a really hard day because I'm feeling really overwhelmed, because I'm feeling really out of my depth. What I've now done is model permission to go, oh yeah, that was hard. But then the next day I'm picking myself up and going, I'm going into work today to figure that out and do that. And in organizations, whilst our team are not children, it's the same principle. Is as a leader, if you've been modeled, if you model what it looks like to do the hard thing, then you're opening the way for your staff to do the same. And Marianne Williamson talks about that. When we give ourselves permission, we inadvertently give permission for others as well. And I think that's so pivotal. And I think we forget that as a leader. If I want that authenticity and I want that honesty I really want to know what you think, Jason and Lauren. But if I'm not telling you what I think, there's again that mismatch. So how do we create that? And it start with what you feel comfortable with. Don't, tell them about, when you were 4 and this thing happened and, blah, 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 blah. That's not what we're talking about with that vulnerability. But you're like, yeah, that was really hard. That was a really hard meeting for me. I was really struggling with that today. That vulnerability. And then you're like, then that gives permission for the others to go, oh yeah, that was hard. Oh, what did you think about that? What did you think about that? And that's how, we snowball effect those outcomes.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time on this podcast today, Kylee. I know there's been so much information. I'm sure we could speak to you for hours on end, but I know the listeners are going to get a lot out of this 30-minute podcast. And on that, if people have questions or they want to know more about you, where can they find you?
Yeah, so on LinkedIn, Kylee Leota, KYLEELEOTA. On Insta and Facebook, Elements 4 Success. And my website, www.elementsforsuccess.com.au.
Okay, thank you. We'll definitely put them in the show notes.
Yeah. Well, Kylee, like Lauren said, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on today. Now, the last thing we like to ask all of our guests, so you can't run off just yet, is if you were to give 30 seconds to 60 seconds of advice, now it might be something that we talked about here on the podcast, it might be something completely different, what would that be?
Whoa, there's so many that are rumbling around in my head. I think that if we're talking about leadership and I think, first of all, I always just go back to self-leadership. How am I leading myself right now? There's a really great quote by a gentleman by the name of Vusi Thembekwayo, and he says, identity is man-made, so thereby it can be man-changed. So if you don't like the version of yourself or you don't like where you are right now, you actually have the power to change it. And so often we walk out of our power because we think that things are out of our decision-making and our control. And we have to remember we always have choices. And so sometimes it's about taking that pause and reflecting, what am I choosing right now? And is that in alignment with that version of myself that I want to be? And if not, I can choose again. What would be more in alignment with the version of myself that I want to be? Oh my gosh, I did a terrible thing at that meeting the other day and I blew up and I was a terrible leader. Oh my gosh, I'm a terrible leader. Well, no. let's choose again. What would it look like to recalibrate to the leader that you've identified yourself that you want to be? And what are the steps that you need to take to get there?
Thank you for joining us on this week's episode.
If you got value from this episode, it would mean the world to us if you could take 20 seconds out of your day and leave a 5-star rating and written review.
And remember, you have the power to make a lasting change in your workplace.